Geoff Manchester, good morning. It's a pleasure to have
Morning,
you
Joe.
with. Hi, Geoff. Look, it's a pleasure to have you with us, both as a director of Intrepid Travel, but also as my fellow director on the board of Conscious Capitalism. Today, very curious, very interested to hear your opinions on conscious capitalism, Australia and New Zealand, and where you see conscious capitalism having an impact, around the world during these curious times, especially. I think we're all quite curious. So very keen to hear from you about conscious capitalism, and in particular, conscious capitalism, Australia and New Zealand, where we're both members. And then I'd like to ask you a bit later about diversity and inclusion, because of course that interests Brilliant Women Global and our network there. Where do you see examples of diversity and inclusion, and that may indeed be, within the Intrepid group. So welcome again.
Thank you. Great to be here.
Thanks, Geoff. Your thoughts on conscious capitalism?
Yeah, look, I think in addressing where conscious capitalism fits in the corporate world, we need to look at where capitalism itself fits in the whole world. In our businesses, we're encouraged to think about purpose of our business. Why are we here? Why do we come to work each day? But what is the purpose of capitalism? And originally, capitalism was created to enable groups of people to get together and put funds together to create a business that they wouldn't have been able to do as individuals. So to have capital to invest and create a product or service that was needed in the community. But at some point, capitalism got diverted, and it became about making profits for shareholders to the exclusion of all other groups, and often to the detriment of other groups and the environment and society as a whole. And while I think this came about gradually, one of the really big influences of why this happened was the result of the writings of the economist Milton Friedman and the wide acceptance of what he had to say, which was that the sole focus of the directors of a company was to maximise the profitability for the shareholders of the company. And so this has resulted in all sorts of unsuitable behaviours by corporations over the last 50 years. And we've certainly seen much of this in Australia, and be it from banks treating their customers really poorly, to restaurants underpaying staff, to retail chains squeezing every last dollar out of their suppliers. The list goes on and on. And the impact of capitalism being poorly practiced is that the average person now has a really low opinion of capitalism and of business in general. And business is really blamed for lots of ills around the world. And I guess this has further ramifications as people look to politicians to fix these ills, and people are drawn to populist politicians who claim to be on the side of the individual, but really aren't at all interested in addressing the root cause of the problems. And, and we've seen that in all sorts of countries around the world. I mean, I guess predominantly the USA, but also places like Brazil, and you could even argue the UK at the moment. Fortunately, I think we're at the bottom of the behaviour curve, and that things are starting to change. The consumer demand for corporates to change is beginning to be heard, and companies are beginning to realise that there is another way to do business that will lead to better long-term success, not only for the business, but also for the other stakeholders of organisations. So there's lots of organisations out there pushing for the way capitalism is practiced to be changed. Some of those are lobby groups, some are certifications of products or certifications of a whole business like B Corp. Conscious capitalism, though, is more of a philosophy of doing business. It's not measurable, and it's certainly not something you can perfect. However, It is a way to practice how you work in a business. And it can be done whether or not the whole business operates in a conscious manner. So I guess what I'm saying is that you might work in a business that isn't particularly conscious and may not want to become more conscious, but any individual can take the concepts and use them in the way that they work in business, in the way that they manage people, I guess is an important part of it.
Yeah.
So how would you do this? Well, one of the main tenets of conscious capitalism is a concept of conscious leadership. So being a manager of people is a very profound endeavour. You know, managers have huge impacts on people's lives. So we need to be managing in a way that brings out the best in people and offers them opportunity for development. You know, gone are the days of command and control, and hopefully sooner gone will be the days of the management of people being compared to warfare, because it's just inappropriate. I think it's fair to say that management's becoming much more feminine. So conscious leadership is about managing from behind. It's about being authentic and showing vulnerability. And it's about inspiring others to follow your path, to understand and follow the higher purpose of the company, and cultivate a culture that will create value for the company and for its people as well. So conscious leadership is just one of the four main tenets of conscious capitalism. The others being having a higher purpose to what the company is trying to do. Stakeholder orientation. So really that thing about stakeholders being really important to organisations. So it's not just about the shareholders, it's about all the stakeholders of the company, and providing win-win situations for the stakeholders so that it's not to the detriment of any of them. And the fourth tenet is conscious culture, because culture is such an important part of business, and in a lot of ways is the most important part. It's certainly more important than strategy, because if you don't have a good culture in a business, there's no way your strategy can get implemented.
Yeah.
So how's that,
Geoff? Well, it's fascinating, and of course, as your, colleague on the board of Conscious Capitalism, I'm hearing you, and I'm very keen to share this, with all of our stakeholders, and well beyond, and the Brilliant Women Global Network. I think when you speak about a higher purpose, and when you speak about culture, and then again the other two tenets, involving all stakeholders, and also, just conscious leadership in itself. Really, I think you're right. I think there's a behavioural change, in the curve of leadership globally. Not everybody wants to grab it, but I really take your point. It can be individuals. It doesn't need to be, we'll wait for the leader or the Prime Minister, yes, or the Premier, particularly if we're locked down. So,
yeah, and yes, that's right. And also in companies, because, we in the Conscious Capitalist group, we come across a lot of people who are really interested in conscious capitalism, and they feel like they say to us, "Oh, I found my tribe. I thought I was the only one who thought this way."
Yeah.
And they want to implement it, but they know that it can't happen in their company. So, well, it won't be implemented from the top of their company, but they can. Any individual can practice the concepts.
Oh, absolutely. I think it goes back to the schoolyard, even as primary kids. Culture to me is the way we do things around here. So that might, yep, start with an individual that's got a bit of guts or courage or curiosity, and then it might spread to a peer group, and it may gain popularity and indeed populism. So I'm hearing you. Conscious capitalism and leadership can start, from anywhere within a group, and be the way we do things around here. But obviously, it needs to be tagged and spread, to others.
Oh, that's right. And yes, and it can catch on. And as I said, it's not as though it's a tick the box mechanism. It's something that you can perhaps focus on one facet or one individual part of leadership, not necessarily all the 4 tenets, and not leadership. It's just doing a few individual things that can improve the way you work as a manager and as a conscious leader.
Absolutely. And one area, if we may, move on to diversity and inclusion. I think an area which Brilliant Women Global clearly is very focused on, and we're driving diversity and inclusion within corporate Australia. I mean, in a sense, it's a higher purpose, but it doesn't necessarily need to be anything more than that's the way we do things around here. You know, we consider diversity of thought, diversity of cultures, and not just the same old way we used to do things. Things change, you know. Could you draw on some examples of diversity and inclusion within the Intrepid group?
Sure. So look, having a commitment to diversity and inclusion is part of having a conscious culture, but it's also part of the stakeholder orientation, because a company's people are one of, if not the most important group of stakeholders. So diversity and inclusion is really important for those 2 tenets of conscious capitalism. And enabling people to bring their real selves to work every day has been shown to enhance the engagement of an organisation, which is so important to individual and company performance. And I think one of the things that we've done really well at Intrepid is to have a culture where people can come along and can be themselves. And, you know, and the hierarchy isn't that important. I mean, hierarchy is a way of running the business, but it's not a be all and end all of things. And, you know, as a founder of Intrepid, I can have a relationship with anyone in the company, and people within the business find that quite enlightening at times. I mean, people will come up to me and say, "Oh, Geoff, it's great that you have a coffee with me. The last business I worked at, the senior managers of the business wouldn't even look at me, let alone say hello to me, let alone have a conversation with me." And I just find that quite bizarre as a way of running a business.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Geoff, to give you
I was going to say, yeah, so at Intrepid, I think we do quite well on the gender side of diversity inclusion. I mean, it's interesting because we have 67% of our travellers are female, and about 65% of our employees are female. And even when it comes to management, the percentage of females is quite high. When it comes to senior management, it varies. And to me, that's an acceptable thing because there's not many senior managers, and it is going to fluctuate. But I don't think it's the purpose of the goals is to always have, you know, a 50-50 split. You're always going to have a bit of a range. In our board of directors, it's really interesting because our board for several years just had my co-founder, myself, and our CEO of the business, just the 3 of us who were male. And that was because we had decided, look, we won't have a big focus on the board because the senior managers of the company run the business most of the time. But then 18 months ago, we decided, or a couple of years ago, we decided we would expand our board and we'd focus on getting people with females on the board. And so 18 months ago, we got 2 females on our board, and it has just been hugely, hugely successful because they bring different views to the board and different ways of looking at issues that we have, and they've just contributed so much to us that it's just been invaluable.
Yeah, fantastic. Great move because you've invited and benefited from diversity of thought.
Yes, that's right. Yeah, absolutely. You see that. But where we're not so strong, I guess, as a company is the employment of Indigenous people, minority groups, or people from disadvantaged backgrounds. Although in Australia, I mean, it's a bit hard because we don't, with minority groups, because it's not as though we record your background or, you know, your birth or anything for employees. So at times I think, well, we seem to have a lot of different types of faces around the business. So it's not something that's measured. But recently we did have our first transsexual employee, or certainly outward showing transsexual employee. And this was a really positive experience because the person was very vocal about their experience and the unconscious biases that existed. But more importantly, they were willing to talk about their life and their experience with our people, and gave presentations to our staff, and really become engaged in expanding our people's knowledge and experience of working with transsexual people and understanding the issues that they have. So, so that, that was really valuable, and the person really bloomed from being able to talk about who they were. And I guess that thing of bringing their whole self to the business, they were able to be their whole self rather than having to hide away what they are as a person.
Yeah, I can hear that. That comes to leaders being authentic leaders, because to be an authentic leader, I think you need to enable the people around you to be authentic and to be their whole or true selves.
Yes, absolutely. Yes.
That brings the best out of people.
Yes, it does. Yes.
Geoff, you said
and if leaders are authentic and vulnerable, well, then everyone in the company realizes that they don't need to put on some face of what they're like, and that they can come to work and they can show their vulnerabilities and their fears, and everyone can live with that and allow for that, and it enables people to become engaged. Yeah. And while engaged is I know it's a slightly strange term, it is a really, really important measurement, and it is something that you can measure. And to me, it's very real. What it shows is very real. It's not too esoteric.
You gave an example that I find fascinating and really valuable, where people not only can meet the founder and the director of your business, which is yourself, eye to eye, but you'll stop and have a coffee and a conversation with them. Now, if I can throw you a sticky one, a tough one, do leaders often resist doing that? And I know, Geoff, I know personally you do that and you encourage that within your culture, and it happens. So that's absolutely a brilliant example of, authentic leadership and gutsy, courageous leadership. But is one of the reasons why leaders often don't confront or stop and have a coffee and a conversation with their staff, is it because of fear of being tripped up, or fear of, well, this is just going to create a bit of work, or I have to reverse my strategy? Why do people not stop and have a coffee with their employees?
Yeah, I think it's probably a little bit of fear of being there, exposing their real selves to their employees, and that thing of thinking that leaders have to be these idols who are up on a pedestal, who have no faults and no fears, and that they can just do anything that's required of them. So I think it's partially that, but it's also partially that comes back to profits being the most important thing, and they will always have something they see as more important to do that is going to show up in short-term profits for the business. Yeah. When in fact, in the longer term, stopping and having the odd conversation. I'm not talking about doing it, an hour every day. It's just an occasional conversation with people. It doesn't even have to be as formal as a coffee. It's just perhaps walking around the business and having a chat with some random person, every now and then. Yes, that might be taking away something else that you could be doing, but that 15 minutes is so marginal to the performance of the overall company that the marginal benefit of improving the culture of the business contributes so much more.
Yeah, business is done through people, and I imagine in the travel business that isn't going to change too soon.
No, it is all about people, and while technology is important to our business, everything we do is about is about people. And, we're selling to people. We're taking people traveling in groups and giving them an experience. So yes, people is everything for us.
Yeah. Geoff, you've provided a lot of insights, and knowing you personally, I'm really grateful that you're so open about, your view on conscious capitalism and where the world's going, what can be done, how we can make some small, incremental improvements with our culture at work. And the same applies to diversity and inclusion in the thoughts you've shared. Did you have any final comments or thoughts before we go and share this
Look,
interview?
I think just for people listening, through Conscious Capitalism, we do provide a lot of material that can really assist with your own development, whether it is about leadership or developing culture or understanding, stakeholder orientation. Have a look at it and see if there's anything there that's of interest to you. And good luck, as I say.
Fantastic. Geoff Manchester, founder and director of Intrepid Group and a longtime board member of Conscious Capitalism. Thank you very much for your time.
My pleasure, Joe.
Thanks, Geoff.